Welcome everybody to the Civility Project. We are so excited to be with the community of Yuma, Arizona tonight, and we are grateful to Arizona Western College that is bringing us to you. I'd like to begin by inviting Lori Stoft to introduce what the idea was behind this program, why we're partnering, and then we'll share a little bit of a sponsor video and we'll get started in the format of our evening. So Lori, take it away.
Oh, thank you so much, Lynn. I'm really grateful to Lynn for helping set this up. And I want to take a quick moment to thank the people that partnered with us to make this happen. ASU and Yuma partnered with us, Optimus International, the Yuma chapter, Arizona Complete Health, University of Arizona at Yuma, and the Yuma County Chamber of Commerce. I'd like to personally thank Maria Chavoya and Jonathan Lyons for their help with setting this up from the very beginning. And Ashley McAwiley, who you see on the screen, has been instrumental. So I'd like to thank everybody for being here and toss it really briefly to my supervisor, Dr. Kaur, just for a quick welcome.
Thank you, Lori, and this really will be quick. Hello, everyone. I am Daniel Kaur. I am the proud president of Arizona Western College, and I'm thrilled that the college is able to take a lead role in initiating these conversations. You know, Lori is always great about saying the college needs to position itself as a thought leader in the community, to ask the tough questions, to start the conversations that need to be had. And we're also very fond of being, very proud of being a college of the community. And when there's a problem, an issue in our community, we want to be part of the solution. So we were proud to our assertive response to COVID. And now I think we all would agree that civility is an issue that needs to be addressed, and the college is just happy to be part of it. I'm glad you're joining us, and I'm just really proud of the college and proud of my community that we're doing this today. So I'll stop and let the experts take us from here.
Thank you so much. It's really wonderful to have you on and to take the time to address us. And I'm just in admiration of the Yuma community for coming together in this cross-partisan way to host such an event. And the turnout is amazing. The people that have registered, we have really big numbers. So that's really cool. So the way this will go tonight is in a minute, I'm going to play a very brief sponsor video. We have two generous sponsors that make the Civility Project possible, free of charge to you. It is Delta Dental and also TCF Bank, which I think is now Huntington Bank. And so we are really grateful to them for making this possible so that we can speak to audiences around the country. So without further ado, here's a quick little video to share with you.
We are living in challenging times. Politics is polarizing. Racism is rampant. The pandemic is frightening, and families are divided. Tough times require more dialogue and more understanding. But navigating our differences constructively is hard work. Delta Dental believes that healthy, smart, vibrant communities are also civil and harmonious. They are places where disagreement does not have to be toxic or destructive. Civility starts with listening. Welcome to the Civility Project.
All right, so what I'd like to do is to invite Stephen, Henderson, and Nolan Finley, who are the founders of the Civility Project, to begin by taking us through what this is and how it came to be, just to let you guys know the way that tonight's going to go, or to afternoon, we're tonight, but for you it's still afternoon, I apologize. But what we're gonna do is we're gonna have about 20 minutes of a conversation. Then we're gonna have two breakout rooms where you'll have the opportunity to be in small group conversations. In between those two, we'll come back and we'll debrief and sort of share how that went, and then we'll finish up with Q&A. As we're doing all of this, feel free to please put your questions in the chat and I'll weave them into the program as they come across. So Stephen and Nolan, why don't you begin by introducing what the Civility Project is and how it came to be?
Who's going first tonight, you or me?
It's up to you, Steve.
I'll go first. So first, thanks to all of you for being with us tonight, and thanks for the invitation to talk with you. We've been doing this now for a little more than a year during the pandemic on Zoom, as opposed to in person, and that allows us to do it with people all over the country because we don't have to get on a plane or drive there. So it's really great to be able to share this experience with people who aren't from our community here in Southeast Michigan. I think the best way to describe the Civility Project is probably as an effort by Nolan and by me to share the things that we have learned in the relationship that we have had since about 2007, so almost 14 years now that we have been working together and have become good friends against a great many odds, and I'll say that up front. Nolan and I could not be more different in many, many ways. We certainly see the world in extremely different ways. We met when I came back to Detroit from the East Coast, where I lived for many years, but Detroit is my home. I came back in 2007 and was the editorial page editor of the Detroit Free Press, which is the liberal newspaper here in Detroit. And Nolan was then and is now the editorial page editor of the Detroit News, which is the conservative newspaper in town. One of the things that we're really fortunate, I think, to have still in Detroit is two distinct editorial voices, two distinct newspapers that really come at issues in very fundamentally different ways. Most cities don't have that anymore. But because that's a part of the community here, you know, when I got back, people thought it would be really interesting or maybe kind of funny to pair me up with Nolan on television or at live events or other places and kind of watch us go at it. They figured, well, here's two people who can't agree on anything. This will be great television or radio or something like that. And truth is, they were right. We were good at that, and we both learned very quickly that we saw things extremely differently, and that we could argue about just about anything. If you put any issue between the two of us, we'd have a different point of view about it, and we'd have a real row over it. But we also learned over time that we had a lot of things in common too, and that we actually liked each other, which surprised, I think, the two of us, but also surprised lots of other people in our community. They couldn't quite understand how two people who had such disagreement could actually find their way to a relationship that didn't that wasn't affected by those disagreements. And so if you think about the timing of this is the beginning of the Obama administration, when Nolan and I are kind of getting to know each other and working together. If you think of what's happened to our country over the intervening time and coming up to today, the kind of relationship we have has become rarer and rarer. And the very ability to relate to people who we don't agree with is now not just unusual, but even frowned upon in lots of places. I mean, there are lots of people who think, hey, you should not be friends with people who are on the quote other side of the political disagreements that we have. That there's a danger to being friends with those people, that it somehow softens the advocacy or the arguments that you're making. And we really have learned that that's not true, and that there is real value in being able to talk with each other, to argue with each other, to even seem like maybe we might fight, which if you've ever seen the two of us or heard the two of us on television or radio, and sometimes it does seem like someone's going to get out of their chair and lunge at the other one. We're able to do all of those things though, and then come back to the place where we respect each other, where we even like each other, and where we can relate to each other. And so, it has become more and more apparent to us that this is worth sharing with other people as the national dialogue has broken down, as we've seen people resort to unimaginable ways of expressing not just their point of view, but their criticism or their disdain for the opposite. And so this project was born of the idea that there was some value in sharing that. And what we'll do over the next hour and a half is talk about how we've maintained that space and how we think you can do that with people in your own world, with people that you live with, people who you go to school with, people who you work with, maybe even people who you go to church with. The idea that we have control over the way that relationships work in the spaces where we live, I think is really at the heart of what Nolan and I have been doing and what we are trying to share with other people.
I would just add to that some things that we're not trying to do. We are not trying to erase our differences, erase our disagreements, to bring us all to some kumbaya moment where we can sit in a room and say, we agree on all of that. It's not going to happen. It probably shouldn't happen. We always need sort of that tension in our society, that vigorous debate. What we're trying to do is tone down the hate and tone down the bitterness and create a place where we can bring our differences and live together in a civil environment. And what we're seeing today, as Steve mentioned, is this increasing incivility, and incivility turning into hatred. And we know what hatred turns into. We only have to look to history and not that ancient history. We know how hatred can lead to dehumanization and the horrible acts that come from that. We don't necessarily, as I said, want people to agree on everything, but we do want them to learn to converse civilly, to exchange ideas, and to come to a place where they can have respect for one another, despite the differences. And we say at the Civility Project that we believe most people, no matter which side of this divide you're on, most people come to their opinions in the same way, in the same honest way. They take the information available, apply their own values and experiences, and come up with an opinion. And if we can learn to understand what those values and experiences are, makes it easier to approach a conversation with the other person without suspicion and with some sort of appreciation of where they're coming from. And we've done that exercise over and over the last few years, where we put people together and just ask them to get to know each other first. What are the values? What are the experiences that shape your opinions? Why are you conservative? Why are you a progressive? Understand that first, and then go ahead. Steve and I did that exercise, and it was a big leap forward in our relationship to understand where our values and our opinions were coming from, what life experiences forged those, forged who we are. Because our tendency is to hear somebody express a view we disagree with, and our first reaction is, oh, that person's evil, that person's stupid, that person wants to tear down the country. And to assign those sort of negative motives, sinister motives to someone who thinks differently than us. And so it's helpful to have these conversations before you discuss your political differences, to first discuss who you are. And it's worked for us, and hopefully it'll work for the folks in your community.
So the exercise that Nolan was talking about is something that we did. I'm pretty sure it was in 2017. I might have the year off by one or two, but the NPR project called StoryCorps, which is an effort to kind of capture narratives about American relationships, really. And it travels around the country. It came to Detroit, and there was an open call for people to sign up and bring somebody down that they would have a conversation with about their relationship. And so, of course, most of StoryCorps is about families talking with one another, or spouses talking with one another. I decided that instead of that, I was going to take Nolan with me down to StoryCorps and have us have a conversation about our relationship. And I said, look, I don't want us to go in there and have the same arguments that we have on TV or on radio. I actually want us just to talk about ourselves. I want each of us to talk about where our points of view come from. What is it that makes me a liberal or a progressive? What are the things that that I've experienced that lead me to believe that that's the side of the political spectrum that I identify with, and that's the lens I want to use to solve problems. And so I talked about all of those things and where I believed those came from. And then Nolan did the same about the things that led him to believe that the conservative side of the political spectrum is the right one, and that's the best way to solve problems. And we'd known each other about 10 years when we went to go do this. So we weren't strangers, but I think both of us learned a lot about the other that we didn't know before we'd had that conversation, which was, I think, really important. But just as important, and if not more, I think it made us see each other in really different light. Now, I think when we argue or disagree, I think we both have a much deeper understanding of where the other person is coming from, and in some ways a deeper respect for the conclusion that that person is making, because we know more about the experiences that led them there. And I think if you were someone who watched us argue before this and watched us argue after this, I think you see a difference. And it's not a difference in disagreement. We still disagree just as much as we always did. And we can both get pretty worked up in those disagreements. But there is a respect that I think is heightened by that experience, and an understanding. And those two things, I think, are the core of civility, right? Understanding and respect for somebody, even though they're saying something that drives you absolutely crazy. And I think both of us would say there are times when the other one says something that you're like, you have thought.
And to that point, to this point Steve made, is you can hear somebody say something that you totally disagree with, and you think, oh, they must have pulled that, just out of the clear blue. Having sat down with Steve, having understood his experiences, I know where it comes from, and I know he puts a lot of thought into forming his opinions, and they're not knee-jerk. He's not got a little playbook here and says, I'm going to this is the issue, I'm going to page 4, and yeah, that's how I think because I'm a progressive. He puts a lot of thought into it, and he surprises me and others sometimes, and I hope I surprise him and others sometime with the opinions I form. And it becomes, the conversations, as Steve said, are still as heated, but they're much more rewarding in that we're actually listening to each other and perhaps learning something about the issue, about each other, sharpening our own opinions. We're finding value in the conversation other than just screaming at one another and then walking away and not talking about each other. Steve's right. We weren't strangers in a true sense when we walked into that little Airstream trailer to do StoryCorps, but we were strangers on a lot of levels because we hadn't taken the time to figure out those experiences and that background. We thought we knew a lot about each other because we knew the outline, but filling in the points was very important because you can make a lot of assumptions about people. You look at somebody and say, oh, you come from here, this is your race, this is your education, and you make a lot of assumptions without actually taking the time to fill in the blanks.
So we have questions already coming in, which is super exciting, but we have about 5 minutes until we're going to go into breakout rooms, and I won't lose the questions, I promise. But I thought we could just start by talking about, sort of what we do to cultivate this respect with or for between people when we don't know them well, and maybe sort of outline some of those key steps, and then we will jump into the small group conversations.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think what we've been talking about is the very first step. You've got to have that sit down conversation before you start talking about difficult political issues and the things that separate you. Just sit down and figure that out, who it is you're talking to, and get that down, because I guarantee you, once you have that conversation and you learn to see somebody a little bit broader than from a bit broader perspective than just their political view, you'll have more respect for them. You'll have more appreciation of them. And it will take the anger to a certain degree out of the conversation. So you can listen and learn and share. So I do think that the process we just discussed is the first step. And there's other steps that we'll talk about later, other tips, other approaches you have to take to keep the conversation civil and productive. But that's step number one.
You can't. I think you can't participate in a truly understanding and respectful exchange with somebody if you just don't even know who you're talking to or where they're coming from, and that's the most difficult part. If you think about it, though. The political narratives that we're living with now and the way we engage with them, they all encourage the opposite, right? It's so easy to get into an argument with somebody because of things like social media, which ostensibly connect us all in a way that is supposed to be better and richer than the real world. But of course, it allows for a kind of anonymity and a kind of unknowing that I think leads to the incivility that we see on social media. And then, of course, the culture of social media really reinforces all of that, right? You get accolades on social media for how nasty you can be. You get praise on social media for stomping on people who disagree with you. You get hand claps for shutting people out, for blocking people, and it's never enough just to block someone. You got to say, I blocked this person, because that says to the rest of the world, I'm not speaking to that person anymore, and people cheer. All of those things work against the idea of knowing the people that you're talking with or debating with better, and getting a more fruitful exchange out of it. And so you have to do this, you really do have to resist some of what we're all told are the easiest ways to have political debate, right? Staying away from arguments on social media, I think, is one of the greatest ways to encourage civility. And I say that as a great advocate of social media. I love social media. I love what it portends. I think the possibilities there are endless, and we're right in the infancy of this kind of exchange. But right now, it is a really immature medium and tool for the kind of exchange that we're talking about. And so, staying away from it when you want to talk about these kind of more serious things, and doing that in places where you could actually get to know people, is one of the things that I think we really try to encourage.
I want to add just one thing too. When we're talking about this process, this isn't just for people you don't know, people you've just met, people you encounter. When you think about where the most, the most destructive aspects of civility and where it occurs, it's within our close circles, within our families, are some of the bitterest divides, the most damage being done because we can't communicate civilly, we can't come to understand each other. And you think, well, gosh, I know the people in my family, I know their experiences. Don't assume that. I've got a brother-in-law who is so far out there that almost everybody in the family is, not just blocked him on social media, they run when they see him coming. And I've known him for 50 years. You would think I know everything about him, but I've started to take the time to try to figure out why it is he believes, from a political sense, the world is flat. And I've been trying to talk to him, not make assumptions. I knew him when he was a teenager, and not make an assumption about anything. Just trying to figure out where that's coming from, rather than get into these endless circular debates with him. But it's gradually, I'm gradually gaining a greater appreciation of why he thinks a thing. I'm never going to agree with him. I still think it's all pretty nutso crazy stuff, but there's roots there for it. And when you understand the roots, you can have a more productive conversation and maybe, help somebody along.
So one quick question from Lori before we go into the breakout sessions, Nolan, about the family thing. She wondered if it's harder to have these conversations with family because we know each other's buttons and we can both love somebody and have deep conflict with them, or so is it easier to do it with people that we don't have attachments to, or is it harder? What do you think?
I think it's harder to do it with the people you have attachments to, because you take it so much more personally. And you feel like, well, they're disappointing me. I tell the story, the Easter after, or the Christmas after Donald Trump was elected. I was back home in Kentucky, and we're having dinner, and my brother-in-law bursts through the door, comes and sits down at the table, and he says, "Nobody mentioned Donald Trump to me. I've been run out of 2 places already, and this is my last chance to get a Christmas dinner." So, we take it more personally when our family, in our mind, disappoints us. And I know, Steve, you've got similar situation with your relatives.
I do. I have an uncle and an aunt who are absolute diehard conservative Republicans.
Thank God for them.
And have been, probably my entire life, if not theirs. And there is no quarter they're going to give on any of those issues. They are up at 4 and 5 a.m. emailing other people in the family about stuff they're watching on Fox News. They are late at night calling you up and talking about all these things, and they have been driving me crazy. It seems for most of my adult life. But I stay at it with them in terms of trying to break through those differences, to get to a place where we can actually talk about things. And it's a slow process, no question. It's taken years and years, but I would say that we're much better able now to actually discuss things and leave the rancor out of it. Stop before we get to the breaking point, because we all know we're not going to agree. We all understand that we're not going to see things the same way, but there are still things we can learn from each other. There are still perspectives that we can understand better that other people have, and I think it is harder sometimes because it's your family, because you do take it more personally. But it's also easier in the sense that those are the people you have the most access to, right? And those are the people who can't really walk away so easily. I mean, you do see breaks in families where people stop talking, but that's unusual. Most of us figure out a way to get along, our relatives, even if we don't agree with them. And I think so that gives us this tremendous opportunity to shape this kind of civil space in an easier way than it might be with a stranger.
And that is a good point. You both say we always want to come back to the conversation and that this is a slow process. And so you want to make sure that it's not a one and done, but it's over time where you really get to hear each other. So on that note, we're going to go into breakout rooms, and everybody needs to know this is a safe space. There's no judgment here. There's politics on all sides, which is fine. We'll have 2 breakout sessions. The first one will be 7 minutes, and you'll wish you had more time. The second one will be 10 minutes. You'll still wish you had more time. And the first one, and I'll broadcast these questions when you're in your rooms, but the first time we'd like to talk about what motivates your political position in terms of where you lean, what's important to you, what motivates your vote. And then the second round, we're going to talk about what things in your background or your values, your experiences brought you to that place, so we can really get to know one another. So when we come back in the middle, I'll give you guys about a 1-minute warning that the breakout rooms are about to close. We'll come back, we'll sort of discuss how it went, and then we'll get back in. And at the very end, we'll have time for Q&A with Stephen and Nolan as well. So here we go, and good luck, everybody. Welcome back. Welcome back, everybody. So when everybody comes back, I'd love to hear how that went. That will be interesting to share. Looks like room 10 is very timely. Thank you.
Okay, Gladys.
And here comes everybody. Hello.
Oh my gosh, we had so much fun.
I'm so glad. That's awesome. That's great.
We're requesting our same group be in the same group for the next session, please.
You will, absolutely. Yes, keep the chemistry going. Right? So,
I think they want to throw me out.
It's not enough time, right?
Exactly. Do you have a troublemaker, Lynn?
Oh, no. Everybody comes back and they're all so happy. And I told you it wasn't going to be enough time, right?
That's right.
You were right. So let's talk about it. How did it go? What were the conversations like? Feel free to either raise your hand and I can call on you, or unmute and share your thoughts. And forgive the sunset behind me. It's sunset in Michigan. So yeah, well, not even near, but getting there. Who wants to share how it went in their group? Any surprises? Any?
I'll jump in.
It was a great group. It was a great group. We all knew each other.
I was not surprised at how hesitant people were to speak. And that initial beginning to get to know each other and just put yourself out there in terms of, this is what kind of motivates me. This is what shaped me. Everyone is, I think, and I'll be interested to see if other people's groups had this, hesitant to just put themselves out there, because we are living in a time where you put yourself out there and you can kind of be run over by a train, regardless of which side of the spectrum you're on. And so,
excellent point. Very excellent point. I think that's one of the things we're trying to work through here, because, and that's part of that initial process of respect building, you also have to create a safe place to talk. People have to trust that if you do slip and say something, not quite right, somebody's not going to run off and ruin you because of it. And there's a lot of fear. I think, I saw some polls prior to the last election. 70% of people said they were afraid to talk politics. Well, if we're not going to talk politics with each other, how are we ever going to resolve the issues that face us? And something also disturbing, more than half the people said they never talked to anybody who held political views different than theirs. And those are two things we've got to work through. But we got to create some agreement that it's okay, in this conversation, whatever you say is okay, because we're here to learn.
Olivia, I'd love to hear from you. Thank you.
So we had a great group and weren't too shy, but I think the common theme, and ran out of time like everybody else, but the common theme is that people's personal experiences, right, create how they think politically and how they might vote. And once you understand their personal experience or what drives them to be where they are, then it makes it easier to kind of accept and say, okay, there's nothing wrong with that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's what we're all about.
Who else wants to share something from their group or their conversation? Any surprises, or were you surprised at how comfortable you were sharing your views, or was somebody not and they want to share that?
I'll go.
Or they go back into the same group?
I'll share with our group. Donna actually said it in the chat that we all kind of didn't like talking about politics, and that we all came from very different areas and different backgrounds too. And for me, it's kind of hard to admit that I'm still trying to find myself too. I came from very divided households and it's difficult, but it was nice to hear that also other people had those same challenges as well with their parents or their families. So I felt kind of a common ground with them, and it was kind of nice to just have that foundation with them. And it was like only 7 minutes, but I felt really safe and trusted there. So I could have used more time too, but Kevin did a really good job in 30 seconds. So good job, Kevin.
Anybody else want to share?
Yeah, I think it was very unique that we were in group 7 and we all ended up being from the Midwest. Most of us ended up being from the Midwest, and just seeing how that shared kind of a common base of values and how we've grown up and evolved from that point.
Interesting. Do you think the
That's
Midwest,
where everybody went.
do you think the Midwestern roots had an impact on perspective or on how you have the conversation?
Yeah, for me, for sure. But I think we're all very comfortable in sharing our perspectives. And we did have, families with divided households over politics. But I think, the Midwest is just a little bit different. I know my home state kind of swings back and forth a lot, but my Christian background and the way I was raised kind of led me to be more conservative. And so that was kind of a constant theme throughout our group.
Interesting.
Lynn, may I ask a question about the groups?
Of course.
Because I was surprised in my group, it was 3 of us were from AWC and 1 was from NAU, so kind of in the same area.
Huh.
And Annie just said that her group was all from the Midwest. Did you guys strategically place us, or was just
No, I just clicked a button in Zoom and said, make group.
Okay.
So it was sort of the luck of the draw, like pulling out of a hat.
That's
So,
amazing.
I was just wondering if you guys are trying to create some
no, we
really
didn't.
exciting conversation.
You
We
know
always
what?
look for that.
Yeah, we do have
Conspiracy theory.
we do have a list of people from beforehand, but tons of people register at the very last minute. So even if we tried to do that, we'd have lots of extra people that we'd have to fit in somehow. So we're not that crafty. Anybody else want to share something? Lori?
Yeah. Go ahead. I was just going to say that on our group, we had a really interesting conversation about, actually I put it in the chat. We want to look for the value for our community, not the label for the thing, right? We want to find value that we're all kind of commonly interested in. The other thing was and this speaks to Jack had put in the chat, kind of limit your social media time, which I think is a smart idea. But maybe even further than that, don't be a headline citizen. Don't react to the clickbait. Don't react to the headline. Get yourself some context. You want to be an article citizen. So you want to get some reading in and kind of come to your beliefs with a little bit of work, right? There's some investment in that stuff.
That's right.
That's perfect. Yes. All right. So are you ready for round 2, where you get 10 minutes this time? Yes. This is even more fun because this is about how you have had experiences or values that inform this. So you're really just getting to know one another in a personal way. So this is a little more fun, a little looser, and hopefully it'll be great. If you want to switch groups because you want people you don't know, feel free to message me in the chat and I can move people around, but I don't know anyone, so I don't know if I'm going to put you in a great group or not. So I'll do my best. All right, 10 minutes and here we go. Welcome back.
We're the first back again, huh?
Again, you're so timely. I love it. How did it go this time?
It was good. It definitely can see the connections between how everyone gets to where they are politically now,
So cool. That's
how you form your views.
Yeah, love
Man,
it.
that clock is unrelenting.
It is unrelenting.
Dang.
You know, what's funny is that when we started this, we thought a 90-minute Zoom, who wants that? And then it just flies by, especially when you're interacting.
I
So-
probably
Clock is no civility.
need 6 hours.
Well,
Stop it, Howard.
just
It's cheaper than going to my therapist. And I think
Okay, I like
The
that.
whole presidential term.
So how did it go this time? Who wants to share anything about this group or the progression of the conversation?
Oh, I will.
Yes, thank you, Alicia.
Okay, so we talked about inequities. One side being that the inequities at the low end of the spectrum versus inequities at the high end of the spectrum, where there's abuses on both ends. Whether you are low income or you're high income, there are a lot of handouts that are going to these two groups of individuals. And so our question that we close with is, why do these inequities exist? We didn't answer that, but as that question is a really good one to think about, in the sense of, why do we have these inequities, and how are we responsible for creating those inequities that have that prevail our society today?
Can you explain more about, like, an example of the inequities that you're talking
about? For example, I was telling from my point of view or my experiences that I get really frustrated and just really upset when I hear on the Spanish language news, especially, where they're telling people, oh, the government's going to give you $500, the government's going to give you $1,200. And it's frustrating. It's frustrating to me because I don't want the government to give me money. I want them to let the government to let me work. Don't tax me up the wazoo and let me work. But there's no incentive to just, let me work. And then on the other hand, you have people who have, they're multi-billionaires who get a lot of breaks as well. So that's the example I can give you. I don't have experience with billionaires, but I do have experience with the lower income individuals.
Sure.
But that's frustrating for someone that's, you know, in the middle or trying to work, has incentive to work, wants to work. And it's frustrating that the government is handing people money, telling them, here, you know, here's $500, go find a job.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay, from what you're saying, I pick up the fact that the Democrat Party has an official policy of buying votes. And how do they buy votes?
I'm going to stop you there. John, I'm going to stop you there because we're not going to get into that. We just want to talk about the conversations that happened and Jan's been waiting. And then we have to go into our Q&A. So you can definitely put it in the chat, but we probably won't open that up to get into a political debate tonight. So Jan, would you like to share?
Sure. Our group, I love my group actually, because they shared their stories, and even though sometimes I mean, it's easy for me to talk and I overshare a little bit, their stories intrigued me. And I'm so glad that, I mean, I learned one person and I had a mutual friend growing up, and, you know, and then I learned about Parker experience, and I learned, you know, about going to ASU and how those things are what help shape us as adults. And I saw more similarities in us than I did differences. And I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful that there's a forum where we can do that. I don't know that we would actually have a big, bad discussion. I think everyone in that group seemed to be very kind and very open and wanted to learn and grow from the experience. So thank you to all of them, because it was a good experience for me. And thank you to all of you, because this is really awesome. This is amazing. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, Jan. That's really lovely. I appreciate it. Would anybody else like to share about their group or the conversation, or should we move on to the last part of our session tonight? Anybody? All right, well, Stephen and Nolan, so I'm going to turn it back to you. And at this point, we can open it to Q&A, so please put your questions in the chat and I can do them in the order that we received them. But we'd like to leave you with some very practical tips of how you can do this and start to build civility in your lives, in your workplace, to really, you know, put this into action. So great, these are wonderful ideas, but now what? What do we do? How do we take action in the day-to-day? So Stephen and Nolan, I'm turning that over to you. Give us your wisdom.
Well, thanks, Lynn. I think, you know, the first step, I mean, we talked about the first step, getting to that point of respect. But when you actually, and forgive me, I got a dog going nuts here, a puppy. But when you actually sit down then to have that conversation, set honest goals for that conversation. What do you want to accomplish? If you're setting out to win something, to score points, don't bother. A conversation's not a competition. What are you trying to do? Are you trying to learn something about the other person? You trying to learn something from the other person? You trying to sharpen your own ideas? Those are all honest goals. But trying to beat somebody into the ground or convert them to your views is impossible. You can ask Steve. Steve has been beating on me for years and hasn't converted me yet. So, I mean, but we still have very stimulating, enjoyable conversations, and sometimes very heated ones. But set honest goals for the conversation. Leave your self-righteousness, your smugness at the door. Remember, everybody thinks they're the only ones who talk to God. You know, listen to each other. And Steve talks very eloquently about the listening portion of it.
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about kind of core principles of civility, you know, the first one really is listening, being able to listen, knowing what that means and being able to practice it. And, you know, I think when we say listening with the Civility Project, we mean something a little different than the way many of us think about it, I think, in our lives. I think if you ask most people to define listening, they would say, well, that's when I'm not talking and I'm letting the other person talk. But actually, we like to go a little further with that concept. I mean, sometimes when we're not talking and letting someone else talk, we're still in our own heads. We're still thinking about what we're going to say as soon as that other person stops talking again, or we're dissecting what that person is saying and trying to think about all the ways that they're wrong, or thinking about what we just said and how we might repeat that in a different or more forceful way. I think what we try to emphasize is the idea of really listening to the other person, really investing in what they're trying to say and trying to determine what might motivate the point of view that they're sharing. Why is it that they believe this argument that they're giving you? And trying as hard as you can to see things from their perspective, to try to put yourself in their shoes rather than kind of judging the shoes that they're walking in. There are lots of times when I catch myself not doing this. And so I have some tests for myself when I'm in a discussion or a debate to test whether I'm actually listening. The first thing I always ask myself is, could I repeat, not word for word, but certainly in the spirit of what that other person was trying to say, could I repeat back what the other person was talking about? Could I tell them as though I were them what the argument was that they were just making, and do that in good faith? That for me is always a good test of whether I was actually listening to what they were saying or just kind of listening. And then the other test I have for myself is whether I have questions for that person about what they were saying. I think if you're really listening to somebody, if you're really invested in trying to figure out what they're saying and why they're saying it, there are very few circumstances where they would finish and you wouldn't have any questions. You wouldn't want to know more. You wouldn't want to pick out a certain point and say, hey, you said this 5 minutes ago or whatever. I really want to hear more about that. Like that surprised me, or I didn't know that. And so when I can do those things after somebody has been talking, I know I've actually been listening. And when I can't do those things, and sometimes that happens when Nolan and I are fighting, then I know I'm not listening, and I need to listen a little better. And so, we talk about listening again as one of the really core principles of a civil conversation. The other, though, that I would put right up there with that is this idea that you're invested, not just in the conversation or the debate that you're having, but in the actual relationship with that person, whatever that relationship is. Nolan and I will, have a big argument on TV or on radio or someplace, and really disagree. And at one point, at some points, maybe we just decide, hey, we're not talking about this anymore, at least not right now, because there's no more to gain from this discussion, and it's deteriorating. But we always come back. We always come back to the conversation. Neither one of us ever gets up and says, that's it, I'm done with this guy. I'm not talking to this person anymore. And that's because I think for both of us, the relationship itself is more valuable than any one discussion or argument that we might have. And the way that that happens is because we are both invested in that relationship in the same way. That's another really key way to be able to maintain a civil dialogue, is that the interactions between you in a broad sense become more important than any one subject or any one conversation could be. And so those two things I think are great starting points for thinking about how you build relationships that you could describe as civil with people who you don't agree with.
So we have a couple of questions. One is, how do we do this in the workforce or the workplace? So this could be really valuable and impactful, but a lot of times people don't want to discuss some of these tough issues at work. So I know we've done programs, civility sessions for companies and organizations, but what advice do you have for people who want to try this in the workplace?
Maybe not, maybe don't, maybe find a place where it's more appropriate. Workplaces are very sensitive places. Everybody needs to feel comfortable. The chances there that for misunderstanding, for hurt feelings are great. I mean, you're there to get a job done. Sure, all your coworkers are all that interested in your political opinions or your viewpoints, but if they are, find a place outside the workplace to do it. I think work is just so fraught. The workplace is so fraught that maybe maybe that's not how you ought to be spending your time. When I wanted to add something that was to what Steve was saying is this is a journey. He and I hit bumps all the time, but we know, as he said, we know we're always coming back. We're not going to give up on this. We've decided this is important, and so don't worry if you hit a few bumps, and maybe you get your feelings hurt a little. Keep the goal in mind and keep the value proposition always in front of you. Don't give up. Don't quit on each other.
So we have another question. How do you have these conversations without making it personal? When people feel the issue is personal, then the relationship can be threatened. So how do we take the personal out of the political?
Well, you can't always. You can't always. I would say two things about that. Try to understand when something is very personal to the other person, when something has had that deep, profound impact on them, and respect their feelings. Don't go trampling in there, like a bull, and be ignorant of the fact that this might be something that's caused somebody an issue that's caused somebody a lot of pain, and they have a lot of passion for. So handle it with some respect and sensitivity. The other thing in not making it personal is don't make assumptions about people based on what you think you know about their politics. It happens to Steve and I all the time. I said in the great breakout room, we get hate mail every day. People telling us how stupid we are, how much they dislike us, and worse, based only on what they've read of our work or heard us say on the radio or television. Don't do that. I tell a story. One of my first encounters with Steve, we were up on at a resort in northern Michigan for the Republican State Convention. It's a pretty difficult place for Steve to be, but we were up there. And we were standing at the bar late at night having a conversation. I walk away for something, and these two Republican ladies pounce on me and say, "How could you be talking to him? We just hate him. He's so awful." I said, "Do you know him?" And they said, "No, we've never talked to him." I said, "Well, there's a space empty. Do me a favor, go over there and introduce yourself." They talked to him for 2 hours. And when they walked away, when I saw him at the end of the night, they said, "Oh, he's just so wonderful." Now, he hadn't changed. His viewpoints hadn't changed one bit, but they took the time to get to know him for something other than his political expressions. Don't make assumptions. Don't make assumptions about people based on what you think of their politics or you think you know about their political views.
So as we hone in on the end of our program, do you guys have any last words for what do we do next? Great, we're all fired up. We know we can do this civility thing. Any words of wisdom to leave everybody with?
So I always say, don't think of this in terms of the sort of societal context of it. I mean, it's really easy right now to look around and think, oh my goodness, there is no way we will ever solve our differences. We are so far apart, and the bitterness on both sides is so dug in that there's no point in trying to fix it. I think the better way to think about it is, where are the spaces in your life where you have the opportunity to change something like this? Is it with a family member? Is it with someone at school? Is it with someone you work with? Is it with a neighbor? The spaces where you have the opportunity for actual relationship building, where you have the opportunity to make something more out of a relationship than it is, that's where the opportunity is right now. And it is hard sometimes to block out all of the noise from the wider debate and the absolute real nastiness that flies back and forth. But again, sort of drawing it in to the communities that you are a part of, and spotting where in those communities there's the opportunity to do this. I think that's the chance that each of us has to play just some small role in turning things in another direction.
So wait, before Nolan, before you answer, Stephen, we have a question that we have never had. And Nolan tells the story about the Republican convention on Mackinac Island every time. And nobody's asked this, but we just had somebody ask, what was your experience of that situation like? I'm dying to know. So can you share with us before Nolan jumps in?
Well, it definitely wasn't my favorite weekend that I ever spent. I got yelled at a lot while I was up there and heckled a bit. But actually, the story that Nolan tells was one of the better moments. I mean, these two women did come over and were pretty aggressive in their disdain for the things that I'd written or said. One of them, interestingly, was a car dealer, and this was right around the time of the auto bankruptcies, and so she was talking to me about how unfair she thought the settlements were to keep the car companies going, and dealers, a lot of dealers took it on the chin. There's no question about that. But they were willing to listen. I mean, I'm pretty good at taking people's, sort of aggressive or belligerent approaches and not taking it personally and saying, well, tell me why you think that, or tell me why you feel that way. And I kind of started there. And then, a couple hours later, they were having a good time sitting there talking with me. And it was an example of how your approach can really change the way somebody else deals with you in a situation. That was much better than when I would be walking from one place to another up there and somebody would ride by in a carriage, scream something or throw something at me off the carriage.
Reference for our Yuma, Arizona community, Mackinac Island has no motor vehicles.
Motor vehicles on the island, so people ride around in carriages. It's not a place. It's not a convention that I go to all the time, but I have been since then. I may go this year. I may go this fall because we're going to be up there anyway. It'll be an interesting experience for sure if I show up there this fall. So we'll see.
Thank you. Nolan, what are your last tidbits for everyone?
I guess, the thing I would like to say is that we spend a whole lot of time talking about agendas and process and policies and what have you, we don't spend a whole lot of time talking about where we want to end up. What are our end goals? What do we want for our communities, for our country? And I think if we talked more about that, we would find more commonality, because I think we want, you know, and Steve and I have talked about this in terms of Detroit and Michigan. You know, we want a whole lot of the same things. We just have different ideas about how you get there. And so I think once you settle on the end game, you know, where it is you want it to end up, the give and take and the compromise, the consensus building is a lot easier. I mean, we look at the two, you know, political entities in this country, we think, gosh, they want to take us in some drastically different direction. No, I think the truth is they want to take us on a different path, but I believe they both want us to end up in the same good place. You know, I would say that, and I would say, you know, again, to that earlier conversation, just don't assume you hate somebody based on what you know about their politics. That's the worst thing we're doing today. There's just too much hate, and we got to take down this hate and start thinking about what we want for the country and what we want together, because we're never going to come to complete agreement. You know, that's not the way our system was designed, for us to always be in agreement. I said at the beginning, there's built-in tensions into this system. That's okay. But let's remember, you know, we are all Americans. We all love this country and we all want to make it better. And, you know, tone down the hate.
I love it. Well, this is wonderful. Thank you to the community of Yuma, Arizona, and to Arizona Western College for initiating this. We have loved being here tonight. We hope it's been a wonderful experience for you. And we are booking for a couple months that we still have openings in the later part of this year. So if you have a community, a workplace, a company, an organization that would benefit from a civility conversation, we'd love to have it with you. And of course, I know that Nolan and Stephen would love to do this in person. So if you'd like to bring them to Arizona, I'm sure they will say yes, especially in the winter. That would be great. Yes, yes. So thank you, everybody. Thank you for being here and have a wonderful evening.
Be well, everyone.
Thanks.